With that, now we're going to have our first speaker, Seattle Attorney Pete Holmes. And Pete, you're in your second term right now, right? Okay. And we can welcome Seattle Attorney Pete Holmes.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, members of Tabor 100. It's wonderful to be here. Let me see if I can try not to drive the cameraman crazy.
Thank you.
I'll stay close by. How's that?
Perfect.
So anyway, yes, as Ali said, I'm your city attorney, and I am seeking your endorsement and support for a third term because there are so many projects still underway, still so many battles that are needed to be fought. I wanted to just remind you, though, from the last time that I was here, you know, I have had a second term and did not have an opponent. I'm actually grateful that I have an opponent this year because I get to come back and remind you guys of what I've been doing. Normally, I think a good city attorney kind of is below the radar in some respects because you're actually, most of your job is spent trying to counsel your fellow electeds, like your city council members, your mayor. It's trying to provide advice to all of the departments of the government and trying to keep them in compliance and moving forward. I think that's one of the themes that I have here, is that I don't know what Mike would say about this, Mike McGinn, but there's a really good chance that if I start my third term in January with the voters' approval, I'll be on my third mayor. Two-thirds of city council are in their first term. And so that kind of strong leadership and continuity is really needed. Now, I say that looking here at my friend Jenny Durkan, whom I got to know really well as, believe it or not, adversaries in this little case called United States of America versus the city of Seattle, where and guess which one she was representing. But in any event, it's been a Herculean 5-year effort to reform our police department, and as last weekend can demonstrate, there's still a ways to go. But that's exactly the kind of initiative, that kind of drive that made me seek this office first 8 years ago, and it's why I want to keep at the helm to make certain that we don't waste this best chance and this last chance, I think, to reform our police department. But there's a number of other things we've been doing. And Ali, don't hesitate to give me the hook. I want you to stay on track. But okay. I wanted first to give a shout out to you that one of the just many things that we've done that would be one of those low profile areas is working closely with your president when the Attorney General sought input on new interpretations for I-200. Everyone in this room knows what I-200 has meant for your businesses and for our communities. And yet, Attorney General Ferguson solicited input. We, working with Ali and others, were the only ones, this office, to submit comments to the Attorney General. And they were adopted in large part in the opinion that he finally released. I've also been very grateful to see Ali ascend to the Liquor and Cannabis Board because I won't go into marijuana and drug policy reform. I think you're probably aware of some of that. But one of our big challenges right now is to make sure that a prohibition policy that unfairly, disproportionately targeted communities of color, once we have gone into a legalized regime, to make sure that those same communities are participating in the legal industry. We're falling short on that, and I think that one of the advantages of having Ali on the 3-member LCB is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we have adequate representation, better representation in this new industry going forward, even as we realize some of the benefits of taking the war on drugs, at least partially, away from the criminal justice system and start to treat public health problems for what they are. It's public health and not criminal matters. I just want to remind you of a few things. I have lived in the city of Seattle since November of 1985. My wife and I moved here. We now have 2 adult children who are Seattle natives. I like to say I've been married to the same long-suffering woman for the 36 years, a week after the primary. But I put that out because the primary race, and when you start to hear from the mayoral candidates, is the one that's going to be taking a lot of attention. In my race, because I only have one opponent, we'll be skipping, going straight to the November ballot, and you consequently will be more focused on what's going to happen on August 1. I know I will. In any event, I wanted to leave some time for questions, if that's okay as well, because there are so many things going. I'll leave you with this and then try to answer questions. Among the many initiatives, you can read things like our lawsuit against Monsanto to recover for PCB pollution in the lower Duwamish, the lawsuit against the Trump administration for challenging our sanctuary city administration. This is all God's work. It's actually kind of fun. And yet there's a lot of other hard work that we're doing. And just to give you two quick initiatives, my office is now rolling out a pre-filing diversion program where we're specifically targeting young males between the ages of 18 and 24. Understand my office has criminal jurisdiction for adult misdemeanor crimes committed in the city of Seattle. And so that age 18 to 24 fits that demographic where we know the young adolescent male brain in particular, both communities of color, Caucasian and alike, are sometimes struggling with impulse control, sometimes make some bad decisions. I know I made bad decisions, and what we're trying to do is to identify numbers of young males especially that have made some wrong decisions and find a way to help them get back on the right track within their communities so that they don't have the label of a charge having been filed, a criminal charge having even been filed, much less adjudicated. So that's a little more difficult than it sounds as far as the time that's required and the manpower that's required to go into making those decisions. The other thing that we're doing, which I'm very excited, and it really is the first one in the state, it gives you an idea of how that behind-the-scenes heavy lift goes on. We're launching the very first program anywhere in the country to actually go out and seize firearms from domestic violence perpetrators. That is, imagine this right now pending in the state of Washington, in the King County area, both in municipal court and the King County Superior Court, there are over 6,000 pending orders to surrender their firearms. And none of them are being collected. We don't have the mechanisms in place. My office is launching a regional effort to do just that. We've already done a test project and succeeded in recovering many dangerous weapons from people who are subject to a no contact order that has a weapon surrender item in it, and as well as we'll be ready for when the extreme risk protection orders that were passed by the voters in 1491, when families like Walt Stawicki, before his son shot up the cafe racer, he tried to get help. Our program will allow orders that are issued under that initiative to actually be executed. And so that's the kind of work that I love, that I work hard on every day, and that I need to continue doing for the city of Seattle. Thank you.
Questions? And Henry has the mic. Henry.
helping one of our new potential members.
Thank you, Pete. How many attorneys do you have on your staff, and how diverse is your staff?
Thank you. There are 102 at last count. I apologize, I don't know the demographics. I should know that. But we do have, we make every effort to make sure that we have really representative diversity in the office. For instance, my criminal chief is African American, Kelly Harris, and he succeeds Craig Sims, a very dear friend. So that's just one example of the ones I work with directly. But another undertaking, by the way, that's related is the fact that we inherited a pretty bad gender gap as well in compensation, and by the end of my first term, we had addressed that. And it required having really difficult conversations, similar to what we do with RSJI, the Race and Social Justice Initiative, to talk about the impacts of what we're doing. Same thing with talking with the males in the office, that in order to bridge this gap between male and female compensation, some of you are going to have to be held back. And you're hearing it from me, you're going to do it. Let's have that conversation about what it means. So same thing that goes for diversity in the office. Thank you.
Mr. Holmes, thank you for being here. Tabor 100 is really a minority business chamber, and so our interests really lie in how do we continue to increase participation for our disadvantaged minority businesses. I appreciate your office's participation in Ferguson's opinion. I actually spoke to some of your attorneys that were actually working on that, and I know you guys were actively involved, and I was told some of the positive feedback you guys provided. Our state AG. I understand our state AG's role. Our state AG can recommend policy on the Hill. Obviously, he's not the governor, but same as you're not the mayor. But we need something more than just there's a legal opinion that attorneys understand and understand how to read it. You know, there are community leaders amongst you today that have known what Bob Ferguson wrote, 8 years ago, and it took a lot of pressure on our current governor to actually proceed with the statewide disparity study. I mean, a lot of pressure. And then to push for a I-200 Title VI interpretation. What we need is policy. We need policy to come from our legal folks and, quite frankly, push onto the city council and the mayor. Because at the end of the day, discrimination is happening in Seattle contracting. No matter what the numbers say, a lot of those numbers represent large firms. The way the city's program works right now, Magic Johnson can actually walk into town and do $50 million worth of business in the city of Seattle, and the city of Seattle can claim that as participation. That's ridiculous. So discrimination keeps happening. Yes, we're making progress. I'm excited about it, but at the end of the day, I know what it means, but I'm not the one, invoking policy or practices of the city. As city attorney, how can you assist with that? Can you recommend policy like our state AG? I mean, what can you do in your role to go beyond just, okay, yeah, that's an opinion, and yeah, I-200, Title VI trumps I-200, great. We all know that. Now what? Title VI allows us to have mandatory goals. How do we get there?
Thanks for the question, and again, it goes first and foremost to that role that I described earlier, where how we advise the department heads on their contracting policies. And sometimes it's a broad policy discussion, sometimes it's looking at individual contracts, and we'll do that. And I think you're probably aware of some of the lawyers on our team that do that. We also have a lawyer who's a member of CPARB. I'm blanking on the you probably know better the acronym, what it stands for, and where we also articulate at the state level why some of these goals are not being met. The irony, and we could probably have one entire session that just talked about I-200 because it is a complex legal issue. And in fact, folks that have the same objective, that is to really just rip out what we all know was really an anti-affirmative action genesis for I-200. Let's face it. The irony is it was promoted as a way of assuring equality. And so the real test can be, what if we use the I-200 promise itself to set all of these quotas on their ear? Well, you do the disparate impact analysis, you do the data, and you show you've done anything but achieve equality. And then use I-200 to, as they say, hoist them on their own petard. We know what they were intending, but they used the language, the baiting language, frankly, that has really proved too much at this point. There was the initial reception from I-200 meant you can't talk quotas, you can't talk race, and there was an overreaction to it. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to say, many of the things that you've been assuming you can't do under I-200 are just incorrect. And so that's the message that comes from our office every day. You are correct in pointing out I'm not the executive. Bob's not the executive for the state either. But we do have a role influencing, and where we can put out opinions, we do. And again, I want to be part of the strategy that's debating the question, should we even repeal I-200? Would it be better? Is that impossible, and maybe we'd be better off amending it to clarify it? Or is it more than just implementation? So I hope that helps you, but it's a complex relationship, and we do bring on, and you should know that I am committed to trying to eliminate what we know has happened as a result of I-200, and that is disadvantaging minority and women-owned businesses. I think a mic's coming to you.
It's okay. You're fine.
Thank you for visiting with us. I want to piggyback on what Frank was just saying and what you said, that all these laws are made, and we have people in office like yourself and Bob Ferguson, and working very hard. On a practical basis, you can have all these good laws, but we'll have a hard time getting them implemented. And a lot of times we don't know exactly how to interpret it. People are out here fighting for equal rights and things Frank's been spending his life doing. We can do all the things that we want, but we need more of the force of law behind us so that when we say something, we can have an Attorney General's opinion or the city attorney's opinion to back us up. So we can fight more vigorously politically to get the people and the council members to take action. So one of the specifics I want to know is, you have a staff of only 100 people, and I think the Attorney General has thousands, right?
400 or 500 lawyers. I forget what his total staff. Right.
Okay.
I have 100 lawyers as well.
You have 100 lawyers. Right. Okay. But because they're big offices, but it's hard for someone like us to contact your agency and see if we can get an opinion to make sure that we're on the right track, or to use it however we need to in order to make a point about making sure the laws are enforced. So my understanding is, as far as the Attorney General's opinion, if we needed one, we can't ask for one. It has to be someone who works for the government. I mean, state government, i.e. a state legislator. Is it the same with the city council, with your office, the city attorney? That who has the authority to ask you for an opinion? If I ask you for one, can you say, no, Fred, you got to go to a county councilman or whatever? How do we get to you and get an opinion?
Thank you for the question. I couldn't have asked for a better one for a wonky lawyer that has been really working hard at doing just what you described, that is issuing city attorney opinions that benefit, the public broadly. The city used to do that, prior city attorneys, until Mark Sidran ended the practice in the 1990s. And there were some good concerning reasons about why he stopped doing that. My office will tell you that it's a mantra. I want to know, when can we start doing this again? Beyond just, for instance, a brief that's filed. A brief is public record. When we file a brief, for instance, to defend the $15 minimum wage, or to defend the right of Uber drivers to collectively bargain, those are in effect city attorney opinions, because they're widely available. They're filed on behalf of the city of Seattle, and they're a matter of public record. But to do what you're describing, right now we're struggling with the fact that the mayor, department heads, and council members can all request opinions from us, and we give them those. One of the things that we've found, ironically, that we are struggling with is when those opinions are leaked, or when they are, for instance, if we know we're going into litigation over something like, I don't know, a high earner income tax. We know that is going to be litigated. We know there's going to be a bill passed as well. I think that those are two things that are widely known. But the legal theories, which we have been advising counsel on, about how to structure it in the best possible way to get it before this Supreme Court, with the factual record that will stand the best chance of overcoming some bad precedent from the 1930s. That is the kind of technical legal advice that we're giving that cannot be disseminated broadly, because it will go right into the legal theories of those challenging these initiatives. So we probably need, is what we've concluded, express authority from City Council in order to issue general opinions. I think Jenny knows, for instance, in early 2000, directed mostly to the state legislature about the need to combine medical marijuana in with the adult use provided under 502. That memo had a lot of impact, that session of the legislature. And yet, there was also a lot of blowback, a lot of criticism about, should I have done that? And so, I guess that's a long, rambling answer, but I want to issue those opinions. There was a reason they stopped doing it over 20 years ago. Getting council authority to do that is something that I welcome. The biggest problem that we have is making sure right now in this political climate that those opinions are not used to undercut the initiatives that the city's trying to implement. So if you can appreciate that, that's the best example I can give you, for instance, is the high earner income tax. We have strong opinions about it. I have strong opinions, and I have a clear path forward for it. But in this case, I'm advising someone who, an entity, the City of Seattle, that will surely be in aggressively fought litigation. And I want to make sure I don't compromise the city's position.
Thank you. Did you have anything in closing that you wanted to say?
I appreciate the time here. I really appreciate it. I think you can hear me anyway, but this job is truly important, and I would love to work with you on how we present to the issue about issuing city attorney opinions going forward. I want to hear what other issues that the community has going forward, and trying to find the best ways to champion them. You have a city attorney that rolls up his sleeves, literally and figuratively, to try and address these problems, and I would really appreciate your support, because there's so much more work ahead, especially starting in January of next year. There's a real importance that we maintain the progress that we have made, even as the federal government, for instance, is exhibiting signs of going to a throwback era. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and for those, in case you're wondering why, I had on the agenda 15 minutes and I let this go longer, and the same is going to apply to everyone. I had Jessie Farrell down, and she texted this morning that she overbooked, so that she wasn't going to be able to make it, which means I was adding time to everyone else that's here. Also, I scheduled the mayor candidates based on their scheduling. I know candidate Mike McGinn is here and out in the parking lot, but the reason they are not here for the entire meeting, as you know, they're out campaigning, and I did the schedule according to them leaving one event and coming here for our event. What we also have, Tabor did is, as you know, there were over 20-some candidates running for mayor. So we only have two, the July, this meeting, and the August meeting. And by August meeting, it's gonna, I think the ballots would have been out. So what we're doing for these two meetings, we've invited the candidates to come in and to kind of just speak on what they're running on, their campaign. We put up the Tabor mission statement so that the candidates would know what Tabor is and where our focus is. But when we get into the main election to see who we have going into the main election, we will ask them to come back for a more panel, Tabor specific presentation. So I'm saying that to say today is inviting the mayor candidates in to give us an overall general of what they're running on, but we will have a more Tabor specific event coming up once we get past the primary and going into the main election. And with that, we're now going to bring up mayor candidate Jenny Durkan.
Thank you very much, Holly, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to be very respectful because I look out that window and I know there's a lot of places you can be. So thank you for being here, and also I apologize up front for having to excuse myself after I speak and answer some of your questions because we did get scheduled in a couple of things. My name's Jenny Durkan. I'm running for mayor, and I would love your support and for you to get the word out to people about me and what I stand for. Many of you I know, I've been talking to folks as much as I can during this campaign to see what was important to people and listen more than I talk. A little bit about me, if you don't know me, I was born here, my mother was born here, and Seattle is my home. I love it, I've raised my two sons here, but I see us at a critical crossroads. This city is changing rapidly before our eyes. We've been fortunate to get economic prosperity. I was fortunate after my career here. I'm a lawyer. But for about 20, 30 years, I've been working around public defense issues, social justice issues, and in 2009, President Obama asked me to serve as his U.S. Attorney here in Western Washington, which I did for 5 years. During that period of time, I learned how much you can do to affect the social justice system from those positions. And I'm proud to have served with President Obama. Can we just say how much do we miss him? I mean, every day. And every way. Isn't that the truth? I tell you, we are facing, I think, there's so much I could say about the present administration, none of it good, and I don't want to get delayed, but what it tells us here is look at Seattle. We're lucky because we have all this economic prosperity, but at the same time, what has it done? It's created these huge challenges that we have. You can't go anywhere in the city without seeing the homeless people who are living in doorways, tents, cars. And we, one of the most prosperous cities in the country, have to fix that. The housing affordability issue is out of control. It's a crisis right now. People can't afford to live in the city, rent or buy. And people who have lived here for decades can't afford to keep their homes. I can't tell you how many people I know who have lived in the Central District and Rainier Beach who are moving out, or older couples who want to downsize, but if they sell their home, there's nowhere they can afford here. We have to address that issue. And if you look at wage disparities, it's getting worse and worse. People are scrambling just to make a survival while there's more, the city's becoming more affluent. I want to make sure that we keep this city and take intentional steps to make it a city we want to live in, not just in the next 4 years, but in the next century, in the next decade, so that my kids, 20 and 40 years from now, will be looking at a city and thinking they're as proud of it as it's a city I grew up in. I really believe this mayor's election is not about who will be mayor for 4 years. It's about what kind of city do we want this to be for the next generations. I'm proud to say you can't disconnect the economic issues from the social issues that we're seeing. And talking to people, listening, looking at what's happened here since I-200, you know, you've seen on the state level that the spend for women and minority businesses has gone from about 14% down to less than 1%. You've seen what happened in the city of Seattle, and I was very proud. 2 nights ago, we go to all these forums. I mean, I see more about Mike McGinn than I do my family. Hi, Mike. Yeah, how are you? And one of the forums we're at was on transportation and density and what's the new city going to look like. And one of the questions we got at the very beginning is, what's your idea about racial equity, and how does that affect your view on growth in transportation? I'm proud that I'm the only person who stood up and said, the first thing we have to do about that is make sure minority businesses get more shares of the contract of the $1 billion that are going to be spent in this region. We have all of this money coming online, and it's not just construction. You know, for every one of these sites, they need not just, you know, construction dollars. They need computers. They need computers fixed. They need security. The spending goes throughout the system. And if we're not intentional about how that is spent, we will not bring that number up. And unless we bring that number up, you will not have the kind of empowerment that Tabor stands for. That's what we need. We need more of the economy, a fair share of the jobs. And I will tell you, I'm going to be looking forward to not being the lawyer as mayor, if I'm lucky enough to be mayor, because I want to push the envelope on I-200. Go ahead, sue me. You know, I'm used to taking on tough lawsuits. I've done it as the lawyer my whole career. You know, I'm the person that was able to make sure that when Dino Rossi looked like he was elected by over 1,000 votes, we changed it, and out of 2 million votes cast, Governor Gregoire ended up winning by 39 votes. I know every vote counts, and that's why I'm here today. But if you also look at what we can do more, it's not just about awarding the contracts, because that comes at the end. It's also about doing the recruiting. I encourage all of you know and people you know to go get trained up and form those businesses. We've got to find more ways to recruit people, minority businesses, women in minority businesses, and support them so they know how to get the funding. They can make the cash flow. They can do all the things that's very hard for a new business to do or a family business to do. So we've got to do recruitment. The other thing we have to do is we have to have more apprenticeship programs. not just for the trades, but for every part of our economy. So the kids, this right here is going to be President of the United States one day, I'm telling you.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, how dare you?
Well, it's not exclusive. First her, then her, and then him. I mean, it's not just about one. It's about changing everything. But it's not going to happen unless we go into those schools and kids know from an early age that they can be included, that they can be empowered, and that we have these apprenticeship and mentorship programs, and get all these companies that work in this area and get them committed, not just for summer, not just for a year, but over the long term to developing those programs. Take kids on for the summer, then pretty soon they've got the job, they've got the paying job, they work their way up. Some of them will go to college, some of them won't want to go to college. But we build that robust infrastructure so that we have people prepared to make a living wage in the new economy. $15 an hour is not a living wage. It was a start, but we all know that. And you people, I think, represent what we really need to do is economic empowerment. That's where it all comes from, because with economic empowerment comes the rest of the empowerment. So I just look forward to working with everyone in this room on those issues. I know you're not going to, you know, if I'm lucky enough to be mayor, I know that you'll keep talking to me. Sometimes you'll shout at me, but I promise I will listen. I promise we will move the needle, because it's not just about the people in this room. It's about what kind of city do we want, what kind of country do we want, and how we're going to make sure that that next generation for these kids is a better city, is a better America, and we keep moving forward. So that's why I'm running for mayor. Thank you.
Do we have questions for candidate Durkan?
You got the mic. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. I'm Gordon with Experiment, and I know this is my first. I'm trying to figure that out because as a business owner myself, basically you're telling me I'm just supposed to let that happen, let that keep happening, and not do nothing about it but claim insurance, which my insurance premium goes up, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, that's just not a solution to me. And to me as a business owner, it says, well, I should just pack up and, you know, shut down and move somewhere else. So yeah. I'd like to, you know.
Yeah, Gordon, it's a great question. And here's a couple of things I want to respond to that. First, if you're chasing someone, I feel sorry for them. You know, because you look fast. So here's a couple of things in all seriousness. One of the things I was very proud of when I was U.S. Attorney is, and as Pete mentioned, together with Pete and others, I sued the city of Seattle over police reform issues, together with the Department of Justice and working with Tom Perez. Because I had seen in the city over a period of years and knew that there was a big problem on use of force, particularly in minority communities, and racial bias. And I had been part of those reform efforts, but it was just a checkbox issue. We think we fixed something, it didn't stick. So we needed to do systemic reform. And one of the blowbacks we first got from people is you can't expect police to do policing in a constitutional manner, in a fair manner, and still do their job. And there'll be all this depolicing. I reject that, and the data shows it's just not true. You can have good, constitutional, fair, unbiased policing and still expect public safety. And so I think one of the questions you raise is, as the homeless population increases, one of the very sad facts is many of the homeless are mentally ill, and even more are addicted to opiates and other drugs. And as a result of that comes a lot of property crimes. So I think we have to do a couple of things. One is we can't make the same mistake we made in the 90s and think that law enforcement is the answer to drug issues. We have to make sure that we have public health issues to those people who are low-level or personal users rather than just incarcerating another generation. We have to deal with the dealers, and the dealers in my mind includes not just the, you know, and I was U.S. Attorney, we had to prosecute a lot of Mexican cartels who were bringing that heroin, that very pure heroin in. But we also got to look at the role that pharmaceutical companies have. You know, they know to a pill how much people really need for bad backs in an area. But yet we see our communities flooded with these very powerful drugs. People get addicted, and then when that gets too expensive, they turn to heroin. We've seen that cycle. We've got to break it. So a couple of things to say is, one, we've got to have more mental health and more drug addiction treatment. So those people don't feel like they have to break in your store to steal those computers to get their next fix. That's the first thing we got to do. Two is we got to partner with law enforcement so that they know and understand that it's okay to have people walking down the street and have foot patrols like we used to have, know the business owners, and have a presence, but do it in a way that is respectful and not feeling like a community feels like it's under siege. So you've got to build those bonds of trust between law enforcement and community. And we saw last Sunday how fragile those bonds are, right? You know, as much progress that we have made with the Seattle Police Department, and we have made tremendous progress. We saw just a senseless death where, you know, I said it before, is no one should call for help and be answered with death. And we've got to know the facts there, and what we have to do is we have to learn from it. And I think the third prong of that is those police, before they ever walked up to the door, we as a society failed that woman. You know, she was a woman who had struggled with homelessness, she had mental health issues, you know, she'd been incarcerated the week before for 11 days for basically what we used to call contempt of cop charge. 11 days is a long time to spend in jail when you have 4 children. So we have got to do a better job as a society to build that safety net, and not just a safety net, but so people get on their feet, they can own a home, they can have a job. It's all about the economic empowerment we talked about before, but we can do better on public safety too. So thank you for that question. I think there's probably time for one more, Kevin.
Bobby Forge. Wanted to refocus on economic development and speak to the bigger universe of contracting. Much of the development that is done in the city is done by private contractors. We also know that many of the larger contributors to many of the campaigns are developers and builders. What is your vision or thought around creating equity in the public sector and pushing our private developers to be more inclusive in contracting for our small and minority business contractors?
It's an absolutely great question. With your hat, I'll just say fight on. Look, we have got to use, as mayor, you've got a bunch of tools to do that. You have, of course, the direct contracting the city does, where you have your most tools in making sure that are inclusive. But every one of these developers, if they're spending city dollars, you not only have the bully pulpit, you have your contracting ability to make sure that they are identifying and incorporating real meaningful incorporation of minority businesses. And not just, as we've talked about before, is you hire one person who owns the company, but it doesn't really do anything to move the business. So I have no hesitation to make sure that we use not just the bully pulpit to go to those contractors and say, you know what, we're about to let this big contract. You're going to get it. We saw the last 3 ones you did. You got to do better. And here's what, if you're not going to do better, we're going to find somebody who is going to do better. So I think you got to stay on it, and then you got to have the feedback loop. You know, because as mayor, you only have so much bandwidth, and you've got to know, is it working, is it not working, where is it not working? Because every time we turn that dial, there's always a slip back somewhere else. So one thing that I'm very good at, and one of the questions we got is we got law after law after law, but we don't see any implementation. I've been an executive. I know how to embed stuff into the culture and make sure that we actually implement the laws we have so they do what they're supposed to do. So that would be my approach to that.
Thank you. I know you have to get to another event.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Seattle Mayor Candidate Mike McGinn. And Cara, I'm glad you got a chance to, because I saw your hand, but I know she has to get to another event.
I can't roam too much, can I?
No, I'd appreciate it.
Got to stay in the frame.
Yeah, you can like maybe 2 feet each way.
Okay. He's trying to box me in here.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Mike McGinn, I'm running for mayor, and it's really nice to be here meeting with you again. I held the job before, 2010 to 13. And when I held the job, the biggest issue we faced then was that I think we had 9.5% unemployment in the city, deep budget cuts, and we went to work on that. Did the best we could to rebalance the budget while protecting community centers, parks, libraries, and in particular social services. And I've been watching what's been happening in this city, and I'm sure you're going to hear the same thing from every candidate. I'm at all the forums. We're seeing growth is great. It's good that we have jobs. It's good that businesses want to locate here instead of somewhere else. but the growth has been happening so fast, it's driving up rents, it's driving up housing prices, it's driving up the commercial rents as well. It's led to a boom in revenues in the city. It's grown $250 million over the last 3 years, the general fund. When I was in office, it was about $950 million. Now it's $1.2 billion. Yet what we hear, and what we have been hearing from City Hall, is that the answer to every problem is another new regressive tax. We have one of the most regressive tax systems. Well, our state system is the most regressive in the nation, but even when you just dig down on local taxes, it's regressive. If you're lower income, 15% of your income will go to pay local taxes. If you're higher income, 5%. So that's a big difference. So, you know, if elected, I want to bring that experience I had in working with budgets, and let's look at that growth, at that $250 million, and figure out how to reprioritize within that, find out where the bloat is, and make sure we address it to our most pressing needs. And I think part of that is the homelessness situation. And I'll just talk briefly about it because it is such a big deal, and it impacts communities of color far more than other communities as well. If you look at the data, we're moving people out of homelessness. They're actually having some success. They're trying new tactics, which are working. They have teams that go out there and meet with people and try to connect them to the services they need. But so many more people are moving into homelessness than are moving out that it's simply overwhelming the system. So we have to rededicate some of our resources to meet the scale of the problem. And on housing affordability, you know, there's a host of things we can talk about how we get at that. I believe there's one, we need to make it easier for the private sector, particularly, you know, more neighborhood-based stuff. It's easy for a big developer to get through the system and get their permits. That means all you get are big projects. How do we make it easier for the smaller projects and the smaller contractors? You know, the backyard cottages, the remodels to a house, the, you know, a duplex or triplex or small apartment building. So that's the market side. On the other side, the market alone is never going to solve this housing affordability issue. I think we need to look at how do we build more community-owned and publicly owned housing to meet that, because we can control the rents of those. Now, of course, if you're going to do that, you know, you'll hear people out there saying we have the bonding authority to do that. If you bond, you have to pay off the bonds. So how would I finance that? I would tax the big corporations that are having so much success in this city, the major corporations. Simultaneously, you could increase the B&O exemption and take more small businesses out of the equation. And that would create, you know, public construction, which, by the way, we have a lot more control. Great question about how do you get the private, where's Bobby? You moved. Great question about how do you get the private sector to do a better job of including people. But if we were building the housing, you know we could do a better job than the private sector. On that topic, you know, I ran for office because I felt like, some of you know me, I was a Greenwood Community Council neighborhood advocate, I was an environmental advocate, and I always felt like the politicians came around to the Sierra Club where I did endorsement interviews, and they told us what they were going to do, and then it didn't feel like necessarily they did it while in office. I felt the same way as a neighborhood guy. Then I became mayor, and I found out that's how low-income workers felt. That's how service workers felt. That's how communities of color felt. That's how immigrant and refugee communities felt. And if we had a long enough conversation, somebody here would raise their hand and say, Mayor, I wish you'd done better on X, Y, and Z. And I'll say to you, I wish I had too. But it's easy to come into a room and say you're a progressive. It's harder to do it when you're there. But I worked to do it. One was the Rainier Beach Community Center. When it went out for bid, it came back. And the first time. And we were doing it, by the way, in the depths of the recession when we were cutting budgets. I still committed to building that community center because we had made a promise to that community to do that. When it came back with zero minority contracting, I called Nancy Locke in and said, what's up with that? We can't let a contract there and have it work that way. And Nancy said, you know, well, there are different things we can try. And I told her then, you know, but of course there are the issues around I-200, and what I told her then was, you go as far as you want, I don't care if we get sued. So it's easy to say, I don't care if you get sued. I do an inclusion plan there. And we got more minority inclusion than we ever had before, both on that project and moving forward. And according to Nancy, she tells me we were the only city that ever rejected a major construction contract for failing to have any inclusion at all. Now, I don't want to stand here and say that that was enough, or or that addresses the depth of the issues. There's more to do, and if elected, I would continue to meet with you and try to go as far as we can. But it takes a little bit of experience about how the system works and seeing where the pushbacks are to be willing to do that. And the other experience, too, is I think the other thing that happens in a campaign is you come out and everybody wants to know what your answer to everything is. And then you're a candidate and you start saying what your answer to everything is. By the time you get elected, you might think you know the answer to everything, because you've just been through this process. Why else did they elect you if you don't know the answer to everything? The reality is no candidate does. There's no job as intense as being mayor of Seattle. I'm not sure that there's any job, unless maybe it's New York City or something, but mayor of a big city, there's no job as complex in terms of the nature of the constituencies, the nature of the agencies you're dealing with, the nature of the issues. You're directly connected to the people. I always came out and put myself out and held myself accountable. And what I learned was I do not have all the answers. And what I need is, as mayor, what I needed was I needed the help of people in agencies, people like Nancy Locke who knew a better way to do things than I did. I needed the help of the community, and I came to relish the fact that the community would hold me accountable, because that was the only way to make progress, was to have that back and forth with the community. If you weren't doing good enough, then what's the next step? And you got to go out there and take the heat. I held over 100 town halls, was happy to do it, and if elected, I would be happy to do it again. I used to hate it at first, going out to community meetings, and then I actually started to love it, because it got me out of City Hall and just got me talking to people, and I like that a lot more. So I'll stop there. You heard my priorities. Hold the line on regressive taxes, reprioritize the budget to those most in need. To the extent we need to fund new initiatives, and I think we will, particularly around building affordable housing, we should tax the most successful corporations, and an income tax, if it works, on the wealthy, on high-income earners. And that type of money should be used to address the fact that so many people are getting squeezed out of this town. Whether it's young people, whether it's immigrants, whether it's communities of color, whether it's seniors who can't pay the property taxes, we got to stop the Seattle squeeze and try to figure out how we're going to address it, not just from the private sector, but from the public sector as well. Thanks.
Henry has the mic.
So, good morning, everyone. Just for the sake of transparency, I wanted to... That mic is not on. Okay, so anyway. Okay, so for the sake of transparency, once again, I wanted to ask the question to Jenny Durkan, but I will also let the audience know as well as you. Right now, the City of Seattle has put out the EIS for the Holland MHA, so you're familiar with all of that. Right. We're in our 45-day comment period, and I wanted to ask Jenny if she and her campaign were going to make a comment on that, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware that because we're in our comment period, this is an opportunity to really take a look at the EIS. We have an IDT, which is an interdepartmental team from every major department in the city, and I sit on that team on behalf of City Light with 2 others. So we're looking at the WIMBY program, we're looking at the environmental justice portion of that, and we're making a comment to that EIS, but everyone needs to know, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware that your comments will be out there, because this is a great opportunity to affect HALA, which everybody knows what that is, and the mandatory housing affordability, which I will send a link to Tabor. You guys can put it on the website, but you need to make a comment, or just your voices need to be heard, because this is truly going to affect the development, how City Light places lines, their overhead, underground, in the most vulnerable communities. Who's going to bear the cost of that? What the lot lines are going to look like? What the setbacks are going to look like? There's a lot that is going to, this is going to affect the entire city. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware that we're in our comment period, and if you all want to make comments, you should do it now.
That's a great idea. I've read HALA, I haven't read the EIS, and I think 940 pages. Yeah, so I got to go see if I can find some good volunteers. But people should lean in, because there's some really important issues in HALA, particularly around the mandatory housing affordability piece, which is how much should new housing contribute to affordable housing. And I've heard from some in the building community, their views on it, good and bad. So people should speak up, and particularly around contracting. Yes?
I'm going to call you mayor because you were mayor. One of the, I can speak from experience, you are one of the elected officials that had an open door. That's one thing I appreciate about you compared to our current leadership at the city. Lots of buffers, but you always had an open door, and I appreciate that. You missed a part where Pete Holmes had talked about Bob Ferguson's opinion on Title VI and I-200, which is unfortunate, but and you're right, it's not enough to be progressive. If it was, then Washington State would have minorities, communities, very successful, and we'd be doing 25% business in the public sector, and we're below 1. So you're absolutely right. It's not enough to be progressive. We need progressive folks to really understand the economic impact that's happening to our communities because we're not addressing the problem in the correct way. The city of Seattle has a reputation for having a great program, but when you lift the top layer of that program is including now LGBTQ, which I have no data that shows that there are disparate impacts. Title VI is very, very specific. It's about discrimination and it's about inequity. Mr. Mayor, if you were to become mayor again, now that we have a Bob Ferguson legal opinion that actually outlines how a city or a public entity can go around I-200 and put mandatory goals, would you commit to that?
I would go as far as the law permits, and I'd push to the edge of that. And on that topic, I did not ask for, nor did I rely upon the overall numbers that were provided on WIMBY. I wanted it broken out by category, because what we knew was that it was the the Black and Hispanic, which were the tended to be underperform. The women side of it tended to perform better and take up a lot of that number. So I wanted to see the specific numbers in each category to see how we're doing, because each community is different, and you need to be aware of the impact of each community. So, and yes, I will go as far as the law allows, and I'm prepared to push the law a little bit. I'm prepared to take, I was and remain prepared to take some risks, because I think that is ultimately what leadership is about. The price of leadership is risk. Yes, sir. Lance, how you doing?
Hello, Mike. I got a question to ask. One of the biggest issues, and this is in reference to economic development, and I've been doing economic development for 23 years, and I've worked at the economic development office when you were mayor. And this is still a big problem when it comes to business, particularly minority businesses, customer service. I think that's the biggest issue. We talk about economic empowerment, we talk about all these other things, but the gentleman here had a question earlier, I don't know if you're here, but it was about customer service, is that these businesses are trying to operate, they're trying to make money and survive. One of the big problems that the city of Seattle has throughout the entire city's departments do not respond to businesses. No matter how important the issue is, they don't answer the phone, they don't return the emails, they just don't respond. And all the business wants is someone to answer a question or clarify a permitting question, what have you. So, when you were mayor, you were very open to people coming in, and you were very much in the community. And but we still had an issue with customer service. So what I want to ask you, because I know you've been there before and some things you've learned, and I know you're going to get opportunity, you probably take some of those lessons and improve, but what can you do, or what will you do, commit to do, to make sure that the customer service aspect, particularly for minority businesses, is elevated to the level where they're priority?
Right. So I'm going to talk first about some things we did, and I'll try to be really brief about that, and then I want to specifically answer that part of the question, because I have some ideas about that too. I do think it's really important to be in the community, because when you're in the community, you hear complaints. And then the way it works is, I thought when I was elected mayor the first time, that the mayor worked on the really important things and the department worked on the more trivial things. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes it does. But the other place it works is, if there's a dispute between two departments, sometimes they can work it out, but if they can't, no matter how trivial, the mayor has to resolve it. And the other one is, if a department is not responsive to an agency, a lot of those folks are very secure in their jobs, and if you don't hear about it up in the mayor's office, you can't hold them accountable. So there were a few different things I did to try to get at that. One was, I actually, if a letter came to Michael McGinn, I sent it out to the agencies for the first draft, and then it came back to our office and they reviewed it. And I reviewed it. I actually reviewed them all, drove my staff crazy. But I would learn things, and we also held weekly, then it turned into every other week, then monthly cabinet meetings. In between, we held sub-cabinets. And at the end of the sub-cabinet meeting, I would call department heads in, or I'd ask staff to come in if I wasn't satisfied with the answer they were providing. So that was one way of hearing complaints. The other way was coming out here and hearing a complaint, like the one you just described to Jenny. Like, here's what the police say to me when I call them up and they say this. You know, you have to hear that, and then you can raise it with the command staff. What is up with that? And can you send someone out to talk to him about that? That's not the people you sent out last time. So I think there's ways you can hold people accountable, but you have to listen first, and that's actually the mayor's job. And then you have mayor's staff that are accountable. One of the things that OED did was reach out to people and ask them questions. You know, you did that a lot, Lance, and other people did as well. Just call around to people and just show up unsolicited. I think we need to go to another level. I was meeting with a restaurant owner the other day, owns a Lake Chad restaurant down there on Jackson, and what he was telling me was he feels like his business, when the inspectors come in, that they are harder on him than they should be. And, you know, being a black business owner, the thought goes through his head, understandably so, is it because I'm a black business owner? Is it because, in his case, I'm an immigrant business owner? Are they treating me differently than they might a white business owner in this situation? And that's a fair, frankly, with everything we know about everything from education to employment to housing to criminal justice, that is a more than fair question. And what it prompted me to think was that we need to have a special avenue for, you know, black-owned and immigrant-owned businesses, and, you know, that is separate from, I mean, that is part of, but its own avenue, because we need to hear those issues. And I'm not necessarily saying we need an Office of Civil Rights complaint for that. We need just somebody who can answer the phone, and you know, if they're being told that, and have a way in which that can elevate up to the mayor's office. Part of the way I did it too, to elevate to the mayor's office, was in my job sub-cabinet itself. We had a weekly job sub-cabinet meeting in which I could bring things to the different agencies to do it. So, but having heard that, and you know, that's my answer to your question, Lance. I think we actually have to have an avenue, trusted avenue, where you do outreach to minority-owned businesses and a direct line that can then filter straight up to the mayor's office for responsiveness and accountability. Because department heads and department staff will never be as accountable to the public as a mayor will, or should be, because, you know, the mayor's got to come out, a mayor should come out to the community and take questions, and theoretically will come up for re-election once in a while.
What about sanctions for city employees who don't respond? And it's like, I think nothing happens to them if they don't respond.
Well, this is a huge issue, but yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue because here's one of the things I learned in city government. I thought everything was seniority when I got there in city government, right? Because that was kind of the impression, the folklore. It turned out we could actually make promotions and make pay decisions based on performance, but the city had never actually instituted a method of measuring performance that would give them a fair way to distinguish between employees. So we were trying to start performance-based measurements. But yeah, I think that is a type of thing that you should look at performance and customer service. You know, I don't want to turn it into a whole judicial litigation type system. To me, it should be more of a culture system in which city culture is everybody gets a high level of responsiveness. And that's what I was trying to model in how I conducted myself as mayor, and trying to, you know, show that was the path within the departments as well to success.
I'm going to interrupt you because we're running out of time, but we have.
Yes, ma'am.
She wanted to ask a question.
A large problem I see in cities, especially big cities, is drug abuse, specifically teen drug abuse that leads to homelessness. And how can your administration help solve that problem?
And here we are back to the answer thing. I actually would like to
Good question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would actually like to know more about that. And I think the starting point would be, you know, to bring together teenagers and the people that are trying to deal with the issue to get at a better understanding of, you know, why is it happening and where is it happening. One of the things we did was, you know, around the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, we worked to expand it, the number of children served. We had a lot of people on the waiting list. Worked to extend it from 18 years old to 21 years old. So, you know, what I would do is bring people together from the community and let's come up with a plan for what to do next. I'm not going to say right now I got the magic answer for that one, because that one is really troubling. The whole opioid addiction thing and the drugs that are coming in is deeply troubling as well, with the number of deaths that's causing. So we're going to have to get at that one too.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have to rush out or not, because I think there were some other questions that people had if they wanted to talk to you.
I'm good, and I can hang out probably to about 15 minutes after this ends. I'm actually going to meet Mo Saeed, who was the Somali police officer who was hired and then let go, and he wants to tell me about his experience. So I'm meeting him at 12:30. I'm good till 12:15 on that.
All right, thank you. And Mayoral Candidate Bob Hasegawa.
So, sorry, I just walked around the Lake Washington or Seward Park for the Walk for Rice. You know, there was about 1,000 folks out there pounding around. It was really cool. So, I'm here asking for your support, running for Seattle mayor. You know me as probably one of the stronger advocates in the state legislature for MBEs down there. And with the help of folk like Frank and Henry and Nate and others here, we were able to get some work done, but the landscape changed pretty significantly when the Senate changed from Democrat control to Republican control. So right now we're trying our best to, well, I can give you a quick report on, you probably don't want to hear about what's going on with the budget. I wish I knew. Hopefully we're going to avoid a government shutdown though. And it sounds like they are getting close, although I haven't heard an official word of that yet, but we are scheduled to be on the floor all next week pretty much. I'm running because there's a couple of things that, fundamental things. I tend to view things systemically rather than in little silos. And systems-wide in the city, there's a real problem with decisions being made at the top without any grassroots input. And they may ask for input or allow input, but throughout the city, everywhere I go, people generally feel like if they're even asked for their input, it's never accepted. It's just kind of like tokenism. So my history in organizational development is I've flipped organizations upside down, from top-down power structure to a democratic bottom-up power structure. That's what I don't want to do with the city. So we can do that by implementing or re-energizing the neighborhood councils and whatnot, and giving the neighborhood councils more control over what's going on in our neighborhoods rather than decisions being made at the top and then they're parachuting the impacts of those decisions down on our neighborhoods. You can see the impact of a lot of those decisions going on with the gentrification going on in our own communities here. You know, people are being displaced. Huge amounts of affordable housing are being torn down and replaced with what they say is affordable housing, but who can afford it? So that being compounded with the amount of property tax increases that are being layered on top of each other. Because we're Seattle, we want to do right by people, right? So we want to do fund these programs that help people, but we keep going back to the same regressive tax well to fund those things, and those are layering on top of each other, and people just can't afford to live in the city anymore. So I think we got to put a moratorium on all those tax proposals, at least the regressive ones. We got to quit hitting the property tax. We got to quit hitting the sales tax. We got to quit hitting B&O. We should be looking at progressive ways to raise revenue if we even have to do that. One of my proposals is that I think needs to be integral into any conversation about financing is to create a publicly owned municipal bank. With this public bank, and I know Eddie Rye has been all over this and a bunch of folk, but the way it works is when the city collects all of our tax revenue, we have to have a bank account. So the city's bank account is at Wells Fargo, and they don't like Wells Fargo. They want to take the money out of it. Well, what are you going to do? Put it into Bank of America? As if that's any better, right? They're funding private prisons. So the concept is we create our own bank that's owned by the people of the city, and it becomes the depository for all of our tax revenue. Then we retain control over all of that money, and we get to decide how to apply it back into our own communities. So, for instance, the city has like $1.5 billion sitting in treasury investments. That's $1.5 billion making what, 2%, maybe, something like that. What if we even took 100 million of that 1.5 billion and used it to capitalize a bank? 100 million out of 1.5 billion, they're not going to miss it as that investment, but we can reinvest it here and make a ton more money with that same 100 million, because that 100 million used to capitalize the bank with the tax revenues of the cash flows, tax money coming in, pay the bills, money comes in, pay the bills. It's that cash flow allows us to leverage that $100 million to $1 billion worth of lending capacity. For every 100 million we decide to capitalize a bank with, it's another $1 billion of lending capacity. Imagine the amount of affordable housing, or public housing is what I'm actually thinking of going. People have this image about public housing that it's, we're talking about the projects or whatever. Public housing doesn't have to be like that. Public housing can be mixed income, it could be mixed use. We could reserve storefront areas for small business, commercial rent control, because we, the people, would own those properties. We get to see how much money we want to charge for it. So that's how I think we can address the housing crisis in the city of Seattle. We just need to build more public housing, and we own it. So those are the two fundamental pieces: restructuring city government, and creating the public bank, which would then allow us this huge financing capacity to be able to build the housing that we have to build, pave the sidewalks we got to pave to make walkable communities, to build the schools that we want to build so that we get class sizes down to a manageable level, like we did when we passed 1351, but we just never been able to implement it because when you cut class sizes by half, it means you got to have twice as many classrooms. We don't have the financing capacity to do that. So right now, with that bank, and it's one of those things where it's like a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing it? There's a model. People say this is kind of weird, but there is actually a model. One state in the country owns its own bank. That's Bank of North Dakota, of all places, the most conservative state in the country. But last year, it returned the 13th consecutive year of record profits back to the people. So that means that record profit, that means it was making a record profit even in the middle of the bank crash, the recession. And it's still making record profits even though the oil prices are tanked right now. It returns more profit back, revenue to the people of the state of North Dakota than the oil tax revenue does. And that's one of their main sources. So it'll raise revenue on the one side without raising taxes and drastically increase our financing capacity on the other side. One of those no-brainers, rather than we having to go back to Wall Street and buy bonds, sell bonds just to find spiral. We just go deeper and deeper into debt every time we sell a bond. So because if we sell $1 billion worth of bond, it costs us about $2 billion over the next 25, 30 years by the time we've paid it back. When we keep layering that on top of each other, it's a no-win situation. It's great for Wall Street. They love it. They're making a profit. But it's not good for the people. So that's the cornerstone of my platform. From there, a lot of good things can happen. I'm happy to take questions.
Abdul has the first question.
My name is Abdul Yusuf. I'm a board member at Tabor. I got two questions quickly. The first one, the community bank sounds very good.
It's a publicly owned municipal bank.
Municipal bank, yes. Currently you are a senator at the state.
Yes, sir.
The state have a bigger budget than the city itself. Have you tried through the state, and how did it work out, or have you get it done in the state? Or we would like to know that so that at least if we are already in the Senate and this great idea, have you tested it in the Senate? That's my first question. The second one is, at least for the last 5 mayoral races, there is a word that I always hear, and I wanted to ask both previous candidates, but time was short. I hear the word economic growth in Seattle most of the time compared to the rest of the country, which is true this time, really. But I also hear that on business contracting, they will do recruiting, apprenticeship programs, do something about making sure that smaller business contractors like minorities will have a way in. Throughout this time, there's almost similar primes who use almost similar subs. Most of those businesses in the community, they get rejected because of something called capacity, experience. So if you never get a chance, you're never gonna get it. So, and it looks like it's a catch-22. We always hear something will be done, but the city looks like whoever gets in there is doing the same thing because the results are always the same. What would you do about guaranteeing that the contracting service will change with respect to more minority inclusion? We always heard all the good things they will do, but we haven't had any specific things, actions that they will take. And we never saw them taking any action. It's always the same. So those 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take the second question first, since we've been working on that for a while at the state level. One of the tactics that I think has yet to play out is the one that Frank has been working on the Title VI angle and going after it from the legal aspect of the federal side. But I think that there's things we can also do to, you know, I-900, we should overturn I-900. I don't know why we can't get that done. But 200. What did I say? 900. What was 900?
700.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that passed in what, 1999 or something like that. We've been fighting ever since to try and reverse that. But I think that with the contracting opportunities, we can see one of the strategies we've tried to use, at least in this last session, was to increase, and it's a double-edged sword, but to allow for the set-asides to pre-qualify contractors and not have to put things out for a bid and go through that selection process. Some of them wanted it because they could then qualify MBEs and then not have to go through that bidding process, which would be a different requirement. The other side of that is they can build a closed system. So it depends on how they use it. You got to keep a close eye on that process. Other things, a lot of it has to do with, you know, when I talked with MBEs in the past, they wanted technical assistance. And how do you get to that level of business competence to where the business knows how the process works, and the technical assister can open doors possibly and guide and mentor the business. We had in the past also worked on this thing called Link Deposit Program, which provided lower interest rate than market rate for qualified or certified MBEs, actually. So there's different strategies we've tried to use in the past. They obviously are not working. From the city, I think that you can get a mandate from the top down, actually, with a commitment to, if you really are committed to building diversity, you can just do it. I don't know what the problem is. You know, if people are going to file lawsuits, let them file the lawsuits. You know, if we have to figure out how to get around this I-200 problem, but you know, there's ways to do it without necessarily making quotas, so to speak. So to answer your first question about the bank itself, I've been working on this proposal for quite some time. And we are actually gaining a lot of traction with it now. We've actually, this past session, formed a Senate caucus, state bank caucus. So there's a bunch of senators who are bound and determined to move this idea and get something done in the next legislative session. So I've been traveling all around the state, sort of proselytizing, trying to organize around this issue for several years now. And organizations like the Washington Public Utility Districts Association, they love the concept. It helps that one of their leaders is from North Dakota, so he understands this model. There's also the Water and Sewer Districts Association. Everybody that used to be associated with the Public Works Assistance account supports it, which is a revolving loan account that the state had to fund infrastructure, which is gone now for all intents and purposes. So we have no capacity to build infrastructure anymore. It's gone. We defunded the Public Works Assistance account. We're diverting the revenue streams that feed it. We've got to do something. You know, our infrastructure is crumbling around us. And so, hope that answers the question.
Thank you. We're done. Oh.
I've got one.
Oh, did I talk too long? I'm sorry.
I had a question about two things. That you talked about the technical assistance and looking at the community college, where Seattle Central Community College is trying to put together a tech center where SOIC is and used to be, and really trying to get the Democratic caucus behind that. Okay, and I know you're running
Democratic caucus in the city,
in the Senate, in the Senate, or in the House, in the House, and trying to get the House behind that, like the legislature did up at PacMed, and trying to get them to develop that. And so, from a technology center standpoint, there is an excellent vehicle in place that we could build that, so that whether it's a building that looks like Commotion out in the University of Washington, so that some of our younger people could come in and build technology, so that guys like Dr. Paul Jackson in front of you could help get them into computers and some of the high-tech jobs for the future, and not just say that we're going to build you, in the jobs that are traditional jobs, but really some of the jobs that are really passing them by. But even the traditional jobs that are becoming more and more technical, that they're going to have to keep their training up on. But there's not a big push for it. And so what we want to do is, were you to become mayor in this deal, is that something that you could push with, knowing Seattle having the biggest caucus in the legislature? Last time I looked, I mean, you guys got to have, what, 20 people from the Seattle in the Democratic caucus, 7, 10? 7, with the with the biggest stick down there carrying it, and the speaker of the House, not letting that, and Seattle Central needing that, something to be done with that. I mean, that place only needs about $6 million put into it, and you have a state-of-the-art place. Would that be something you'd advocate for, so that we'd have a technical center for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. They didn't ask for it this year in the capital budget, right? Because I don't recall that request. But there's an interesting political dynamic in Olympia, actually, around Seattle versus the rest of the world. Seattle is kind of viewed as a pariah, sitting in an ivory tower looking down their nose at the rest of the world. I mean, that's how the outside world views us in Seattle. So we got to break down those barriers, because all of our problems are regional. But with regard to home growing our computer engineers and coders and all of that stuff, technology that you're talking about, we're having to import way too many people to fill these jobs. These are good jobs for people from our communities if we can get them up to speed. So that's why I would support that, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I got a question. So, hey Bob, how's it going?
Good, Bob.
I'm Paul, I'm QC on 47th, and somebody endorsed you to be mayor. So I have two questions, actually.
47th, dude?
Yeah.
Or 37.
37, yeah.
37,
You were there,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Two questions. One question is related to cannabis. And how can you touch a dispensary and a church at the same time? I'm speaking of Uncle Ike's at 23rd and Union, a block that's historically known for drug trafficking and everything. I understand that Uncle Ike's makes over $100,000 a day.
Wow.
There. So I don't know if it's a zoning situation or what, but I know it's legal, but you have a church and you have a pot dispensary, and you can physically touch both buildings at the same time. So that's one question. The other question I have was related to, thank you for commenting about the bank. And so we have Liberty Bank now, that's opening at 23rd Union also. The first black bank west of the Mississippi. So nationalizing the bank, maybe Liberty Bank could be your...
It's not a bank, it's a building, it's an affordable housing.
Okay.
It's not a bank.
It's not a bank?
No.
Oh, I thought it was.
It's an affordable housing complex that will have commercial property on the first floor.
Okay.
Close, but not a bank.
But either way, I mean, is there possible, since you're nationalizing the bank, maybe Liberty Bank and the credit union can be a part of it?
So one of the things that the bank, as I envision it, which is the way that North Dakota manages it, is that they're able to keep the public bank acts like a mini Federal Reserve for community banks and credit unions, so it can provide liquidity for them and provide secondary markets for their mortgages and whatnot. So the bank, North Dakota Bankers Association loves the Bank of North Dakota because it works with the community banks, not in competition with. And that's what my intention is too. So it would be very supportive to provide liquidity for those community banks.
Okay, just an idea. So yeah,
good idea.
Thank you. We're running out of time, and I wanted to make some comments when all the candidates have left the room. But thank you.
Thanks, Olive.
Okay, several things, and I wanted to clarify something, Frank, that you said about the LG and on the city now, as far as from what I was told on Friday, and I thought Javier would still be here to correct that, because I don't want wrong information or misunderstanding to go out from Tabor, is that has been put on their site on the city contracting as just identification. It does not include part of contracting opportunities and being a separate type of minority, a part of the Wimby spin or anything like that. That's strictly for those that want to self-identify themselves. And you wanted to say something about that?
Yeah, because I'm the SPU Applicant Advisor, and so Ollie's correct. That doesn't have to do with the WIMBY program. So that's something that the mayor requested that FAS include on their website for online business directory, and so they did a content request, but it is not related to WIMBY aspirational goals that we
You boil the frog slowly.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I agree with you that
It's progress. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying that's not the case. I just want to clarify what it is today. Okay, now I want to go back to what I said in the beginning of the meeting as far as the candidate forum. One of the things that we did not do is to put out any pre-questions, any pre-minority issues, not anything. We wanted the candidates to come in today and just speak and present to us what they wanted to present to us. And as I said, on the next forum, when we do once we get past the the primary and go into the main election, we will have specific questions pertaining to our issues and minority things that we wanted to bring up. In saying that, one of the things I wanted to do was to see the candidates that came in today, hear them, and just to see how they prepared themselves for us without us asking any specific questions. And in saying that, I heard things from some, and I'm just going to speak in general because I'm not endorsing anyone, but I just want to put out for listening things. I was writing down as candidates was talking. I heard a candidate that knew I-200, knew the spin, just there are things that impact us that will be part of the questions when we have our candidate forum, but I was trying to see who came in prepared, knowing all of those things in advance. So pay attention to everything that you heard here today, and also to understand why it's important for Tabor and this mayor election. Whether you live in the city of Seattle or not, we are all business owners that want to do business and do business in the city of Seattle. So it's very important to us who the next mayor is. One of the things that is going to come out publicly, because the recruitment is going to start, our #1 trooper in the city, Nancy Locke, is retiring. It's going to be very important that we get the right person in that role, and that person is working closely with the mayor. Now, in saying that she's retiring, there's going to be a recruitment, but Nancy will stay on into next year and as long as necessary to work with whoever her replacement is going to be. So, in knowing those two things, this mayor race is very important for the minority community to make sure that we get the right person in that's going to be just as supportive. And one of the things that we knew about Nancy is whether she had the mayor buy-in up front or whatever, she pushed, no matter who the mayor was, to get her program done. So we will be looking for a person like that during the recruitment process, but just keep in mind, whether you live in Seattle or not, this race is very important. And if you heard some things here today and supporting a candidate, whether you live in Seattle or not, it's important that you push and have those conversations with Seattle voters and the minority community on what you heard here today. Let me see, did I cover all my notes? I think also for all of you all that are parents, it is so important and it's so refreshing to see when you bring the teenagers and the younger generations that's going to be coming up. As you can see, coming to these meetings, you're really preparing your kids to have a voice. I was very impressed with the question that the young lady asked today, and I would encourage you, whether you're parents or no teenagers and young kids in the community, to bring them to our Tabor meetings and start preparing them for having a voice, asking those questions, because I don't think anyone would have covered the teen issue if she wasn't sitting in the room today. So that was so important. But just think about how we can even engage more of the teenagers to come to the Tabor meetings, to start preparing them to have a voice for themselves and to be ready for the future to take over for us. I thought that was very important. Any other comments or announcements before we close? I also was going to acknowledge, but Hasegawa is gone, not only him to cover that issue, but his new role. But he's not here, so I'm not going to do it for him. Regina?
Just one announcement. You mentioned the Liberty Bank project. That's right. The Capitol Hill housing project. The bids went out. They came in with 30% women minority participation, about $4.2 million. And of that, 16% is African American contractors, $2.9 million. And that's the first set of bids. And so we're moving forward. We've got questions and comments coming from the trucking community and others, but that 16% is the highest ever of African American count that CHH has had and that Walsh has had for African American participation. A lot of the feedback we got from you and NAMAC and others made that happen.
Excellent. Rex Brown, Department of Enterprise Services, Business Diversity Cabinet. I'd like to say thank you to Holly and all the Tabor members here for a great turnout at the public meetings. For the disparity contract, it went really, really well on both South Seattle Community College and in Spokane as well. Thank you. We are about 100% in terms of participation from the 33 departments and educational institutions for the disparity study. So things are going better than expected, but it's a 2-year process, so there may be some bumps in the road along the way.
but it looks really great so far, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without your participation and support. Thank you.
Ollie, one of the things, I know that you guys don't follow this maybe, and I get very granular on some of this stuff when we have time, but 7 years from now, so I was thinking, there is going to be another election for a president in the United States. About 3 years from now.
Right.
In 3 years.
Thank you. Because it's one term. One term. One term.
Yeah, 2020, there's going to be an election. But in getting ready for this, there's a group that's being put together that's going to decide something that is very important, and it is the redistricting of the state of Washington, okay, and King County. All right, and we've already started looking at, myself and a number of other people that you will be hearing about, the Democratic redistricting initiative, so that we're looking at how these counties are going to be drawn, how these districts are going to be drawn. It is one of the most granular things, as Henry Yates will tell you. Yep. You get in there and it is boring. I'm not asking any of you to spend the time to learn how to do this, but if you do redistricting, you can get to a point literally where you can figure out how to put that house in one district and that house in a different district. Literally by drawing a line. And they do that sometimes because the first thing they do is, before they start drawing lines, is find out where the incumbents are living. Exactly. So they get Bobby Force, if he's the Representative Bobby Force, Senator Bobby Jones, and they put all of their addresses in and they call it lighten up the board. And once they get Senator Hasegawa's address in, and everybody's address in, they light up the board. Boom! And once they light up the board, now they know who not to put in a certain district or who to put in. If they want to go against them or not go against them, etc. So they put them in. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have the people that we want, strong candidates and so forth, in. The only way you can do that is to have people at the table who can make sure that those lines are cut and that those lines are cut right. In order to get those people sitting at the table, the governor is going to be doing some appointment. So we may come back to Tabor and say, we need Tabor to put some pressure on the governor to say, we need somebody on this redistricting commission so that our issue, that we have representation, so that we can, because now we've figured out the game. The game is cutting the lines, okay? Like I said, it's granular, it's boring, you don't want to sit down there and do it because, but the last 3 times we got pencil whipped. Because we didn't know how to do it, they put their people in, they got the people, and it never changes. That's why it never changes, because if you don't know what you're doing, they'll pencil whip you sitting at the table. But we got the game down now, but we may need your help going to the governor and saying, appoint somebody to the redistricting committee that you guys are getting ready to do. And if we do, we have to turn in some letters. We have to let them know what's coming down. And it's coming up soon. The only reason I'm bringing it up to you is it's coming up soon. So put that on your agenda when I come to you, because we need your help. But
I would recommend that we get some names, and that instead of saying we want someone appointed, we have a name that we bring forward and start lobbying around those names. If we can, start working on gathering who need to be on that and stuff. Because
I don't have any problem with that.
Because telling them we want representation and let them make the decision of who that representation is a whole different thing. Also, we still have a vacancy and are interviewing for the government affairs chair. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, what Nate is referring to, the mayor's race, the upcoming candidate forum, all of those things fall under government affairs. I need a strong government affairs chair and leader to take the lead on representing Tabor. We have a lobbyist in Olympia that would fall under the government affairs, that we are giving that lobbyist direction and instructions. Nate has stepped up and been filling in on that part of it, but we need a government affairs chair members. I need someone strong and that can understand and see the vision of what that role can do for them and Tabor, to send me an email and let me know if you're interested. If there's no, yes, Henry.
Just real quickly, I just wanted to mention that concurrently with the state redistricting commission effort, there is also a county redistricting committee that works exactly the same way, and we cannot ignore that process either.
Thank you. And with that, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.